Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful Thursday and a great week so far. Of course, our continued prayers go out to our friends in Israel who have found themselves fighting not just a war with missiles and bullets, but one of information or misinformation. Isn't that one of the left's favorite terms, misinformation? See, over here on the right, we like to just call them lies. Things that aren't true are lies, not just misinformation, it's lies. And terrorists are really good at telling them. They're really bad about actually proving them. They're just good at saying it. And the US media is good at picking up that mantra and peddling it, as we have seen this week when Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and the Gaza Health Ministry immediately rushed out screaming that Israel had bombed a hospital in Gaza and left like 500 Palestinians dead, including innocent children. Interesting, by the way, that they had a body count like 2 seconds after this happened. The explosion goes off and right away, everybody knows how many people were killed, almost like it was, I don't know, planned, you might say. Immediately, 500 people were killed, and without questioning whether it was actually an Israeli airstrike, without questioning whether the body count was actually correct, the U.S. media picked up that line and ran with it. Israeli airstrike on a hospital in Gaza kills 500. This is absolutely terrible. What a horrible, horrible thing. All of the talking heads were on Twitter. Many of them tweeted. And the line was picked up by, of course, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar over in Congress in the Hamas caucus, our resident pro-terrorism shills. Rashida Tlaib's out there in front of the Capitol building in front of a group of protesters on Wednesday crying these big old crocodile tears about Israel and how could they kill all of these children and this is a genocide and these are war crimes and blah, 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 blah. Of course, it doesn't really matter that there's plenty of evidence that shows that this probably was not actually an Israeli airstrike. Israel says that they did not order an airstrike on the hospital. There's video showing Hamas firing rockets right around the same time that this explosion went off at the hospital. Footage from after the event shows that the explosion didn't actually go off at the hospital. It went off in a parking lot outside of the hospital. All of that comes out, of course, after the fact, but as is typical, the lie had already made its way around the world before the truth had a chance to put its pants on. And the media was all too happy to provide an air horn to the terrorists, because, of course, if the terrorists say it, it must be true. But of course, if Hamas goes and slaughters a whole bunch of Israelis and wipes out entire villages and drags babies away from their homes to be held as war hostages, then we all have to take a beat and listen, because there's both sides to every story. And we got to make sure that we ferret out who's actually the bad guys here. Everybody take a beat, wait for all the facts to come out. But the minute that the terrorists say that the Jews are killing people, then they must automatically be believed. So that's what's going on over there, still staying on top of that story, of course, as best we can in the age of misinformation, as the left likes to call it. Of course, President Joe Biden, always one wanting to spend taxpayer money, is set to ask Congress for another $100 million in aid to Gaza and the West Bank, in part, because, of course, we have to provide aid to the Palestinians. Not like that's going to help the terrorists at all. He assures us, President Pudding Cup assures us that there will be infrastructure in place to make sure that that money does not fall into the hands of Hamas, who runs the country. So how in the world that's going to work, I'm not really sure. Joe Biden isn't sure, by the way, either. There's absolutely no way to ensure that. God only knows how many taxpayer dollars over the years have actually gone into the hands of terrorists, because we have no idea where our money goes after we just sort of send it over on pallets. Money is also going to go to aid Israel. It's going to go, of course, to aid Ukraine. Can't forget about Ukraine. We've got all kinds of wars that we're funding all over the place. Meanwhile, in case no one has noticed, we still have some serious problems back here at home. I know nobody likes to talk about that. We all have to concentrate on what's going on elsewhere in the world. But we have some serious issues back at home, not the smallest of which is the absolute idiocy of some of the younger generations, which is what I want to talk about today. So I came across this article in USA Today, and I'm always interested in these articles whenever they purport to speak for the millennial generation or the Gen Z generation. I'm always interested because I'm a millennial. I see how millennials are often portrayed. Most of my friends are millennials. I know what my life looks like, and it's always interesting to me to see how the media likes to frame my generation, because I think that it's a puzzle piece in kind of the larger scheme of what the media is trying to do, what the left is trying to do. And I think that a whole bunch of people are playing right into it. So this USA Today article was seeking to explain why millennials and Gen Zers, so those born after about 1980 or so that have attained at least some level of adulthood so far, why they are struggling with home ownership and struggling with what they believe is financial success. So here's the way that this USA Today article begins. They can't buy into that American dream. How younger workers are redefining success. So this article commissioned a poll to see how millennials and Gen Zers feel about finances and the rising cost of living in the country. And they found that 65% of Gen Zers and 74% of millennials say that they believe they are starting further behind financially than earlier generations at their age. Notice automatically the framing of this, by the way. This is very important. They believe they are starting further behind, meaning we're not starting with facts or data or logic. This is all about how you feel. We're starting from a premise of emotion and perception as the basis for the following claims, because after all, that's what this is all about, right? It's all about how you feel. It's not actually about what is. It's not about what the data shows. It's not about taking any introspective look at yourself and actually crunching some numbers. It's all about how you feel, right? So USA Today found that, quote, for many young Americans, achieving the financial stability of their parents' generation feels impossible. There we go again. It feels impossible. Not that it is, but that it feels impossible. The price of starter homes has skyrocketed, so has the cost of college loans and child care. Meanwhile, older generations are living and working longer, limiting younger workers' chances to advance their careers and boost their salaries. And here's where we get into it. 2/3 of Americans believe younger people face hardships today that earlier generations didn't. And 65% of Gen Zers and 74% of millennials say they believe they are starting further behind financially than earlier generations at their age. This is based on a Harris Poll survey that was commissioned by USA Today. The Harris Poll CEO, John Garzima, says, quote, they're telling us they can't buy into that American dream the way that their parents and grandparents thought about it because it's not attainable. It's not attainable. The American dream is no longer a reality. It's no longer possible. It is a relic of a bygone era. And here are the examples that USA Today actually listed as millennials and Gen Zers who believe that the American dream was easier to achieve for earlier generations and why they can't get there themselves. Matt Marino, here's what USA Today, and I'm going to actually quote it because this is unreal. USA Today, rising cost of living, high inflation, even higher mortgage rates, no more pensions. These are a few of the ways New York City-based Matt Marino, a 27-year-old teacher, believes his generation faces exponentially greater financial hardships than previous ones. Marino said his generation views home ownership as impossible. His age group would rather have more freedom, such as having a job they really enjoy or a remote job, over one that just pays the bills, he said. So let's break this down just a little bit because we're going to get to some other examples that USA Today lists as stellar examples of why the American dream is just not attainable for people my age. Matt here, first of all, lives in New York City, where the price of, rent, not even owning your own apartment or condo or brownstone or whatever, just the rent price is a floppity jillion dollars and everybody knows it. So here you've got a 27-year-old teacher in New York City who admits himself that millennials like him are not really interested in getting the job that pays the most and getting financially ahead. They would rather have a job that they enjoy. They would rather be able to work from home while, sipping on their kombucha or whatever. He admits this. I live in New York City. I want a job that makes me comfortable, that makes me happy. Oh, and by the way, we're facing very exponentially greater financial hardships than previous generations. No, I think you're just making different choices. than previous generations, particularly the one where you refuse to move out of a notoriously expensive city because you like the urban lifestyle to which you have become accustomed. And this continues on and on throughout these examples. This is honestly, this is what USA Today thinks is a solid basis for this argument that the American dream has flown out the window and millennials and Gen Zers are not buying it anymore. Honolulu-based Audrey Alessi, 31 years old, feels good that she doesn't have to deny herself little purchases or skip meals out, but home ownership is a different story. She and her generation are, quote, in the same boat, where the only home I could afford would be a small condo, and it does just make more sense to rent at this point, she said. It sucks because I'm a realtor and I'm pushing home ownership, but I can't do it. Maybe that's because you live in Honolulu. Again, is nobody seeing the common thread here? You live in Honolulu. You live in an urban area on an island. On what planet do you think that that's going to be affordable, particularly at 31 years old? And the fact that you are turning down purchasing a small condo because you would rather rent than live in something small, in something that's not your dream abode, and you refuse to move out of this, again, notoriously expensive city, and then you're complaining about the cost of living. After high school, Ashley Parker, the now 23-year-old, got an associate's degree in baking. She found a job as a pastry cook, and shortly after she started, she got a raise to $16 an hour, well above the $7.25 minimum wage in North Carolina, where she lives. Parker still lives with her parents in Raleigh because she can't afford a lease in the city, where the median rental price has reached more than $1,800 a month, according to Zillow data. Again, 23 years old, you get a degree in baking. I'm not saying baking is a bad thing. God love bakers. Everybody loves a nice cake. I like baking. I'm actually pretty darn good at it. I also like to paint, but you don't see me out there trying to do it professionally for a living. Even if you do, even if you want to be a professional baker, at 23 years old, you're complaining because you can't move out of your parents' house because the only place that you're looking is in the city of Raleigh. God forbid you go get your start somewhere else in some rural area. God forbid you move away from your parents. God forbid you go to a more affordable place to get your start. You've decided that you can't leave. You have to stay in Raleigh. It's sky-high prices. You can't afford it, so you live with your parents. And then you think that home ownership and the American dream are unattainable because you have pigeonholed yourself into one geographic location that doesn't work for you at 23 years old. $16 an hour, by the way, for those of you who don't want to do the quick math, that's $33,280 a year. Let me tell you a little story. When I was 24 years old, I got a job in a small town in Virginia, about 2.5 hours away from my family and everybody that I've ever known. Didn't know a soul there. It was a very rural town. When I say there was nothing to do, I do mean there was nothing to do. It was not my first choice in where I wanted to live, not by a long shot. It had very few amenities, absolutely no nightlife to speak of. And I moved there for a salary of $25,000 a year as a reporter for the local newspaper. I paid my own rent, which was $500. I clipped coupons. I cooked at home. A night out with my friends was all of us piling into somebody's apartment and watching a movie on Netflix because other than the streaming cost, it didn't cost anything extra. And I used that job and that salary to start stepping up in the world. It was a resume builder. I recognized that there was no way I was ever going to be able to afford to live on my own in the place that I grew up. It was a suburb of Richmond, Virginia. There was no way that that was going to be at all within my bracket. I was going to have to leave and get my start somewhere else, and I was going to have to be satisfied with that. I didn't try to hack it in some expensive city and refuse to move and then complain that the cost of housing was too high and that the American dream was out of reach. That must mean that my parents didn't have to work as hard. That must mean that older generations had it easy. No. It means that I am locking myself into a mindset and refusing to budge and do what I need to do to get ahead. The examples like this continue, by the way. Chloe Duncan. Chloe Duncan believes the economy is a bit of a mess at the moment with high inflation and interest rates, but she has faith the U.S. will get through this rough patch. The 39-year-old watercolor artist from St. George, Utah, knows how just how detrimental higher interest rates can be, having just purchased a house at a 6% mortgage rate, about double the average mortgage rate in 2021. By the way, you can thank Joe Biden for a lot of that and his absolute bungling of the U.S. economy. And before that, you can thank a whole bunch of left-wing local and state governors and mayors who imposed COVID lockdowns that absolutely decimated the economy. So there's that. Also, I'm not really sure what you're trying to do as a watercolor artist. I mean, starving artist, I feel like is a cliche for a reason. Maybe she's a really good watercolor artist. I just don't really want to hear complaints about the cost of living from watercolor artists. I'm sorry. Oh my Lord, you guys. These are the best and the brightest these USA Today could come up with for why millennials are so disillusioned with the American dream. Alexandra Chipkin, 31, of New York City. We've got another New York City here. Notoriously expensive city, said that up until last year, she had to make certain choices to keep within her means. With Manhattan cocktails easily surpassing $15, she said she couldn't afford to say yes to every outing. Well, God forbid you can't go out every single time somebody wants you to, because cocktails in Manhattan are $20. God forbid you have to turn down some social outings. Do y'all know how many social outings I had to turn down when I was first getting my start in the world, when I was paying my own rent? When my parents weren't footing the bill for the roof above my head? It was not a glamorous life. It was not the most fun life. It was not the most exhilarating and exciting, but it wasn't supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be. That was the point. The point was that it was a start. And now you have these people in New York City complaining that they can't go out with their buddies and drop $15 a cocktail to hang out with their friends every night, and they feel like that is what's making the American dream unattainable. She says, if I wanted to go out for drinks with friends, I had to choose which group of friends I was going to hang out with because I couldn't afford both. That's an actual honest-to-God complaint that she's got. She says, I don't think it's good for anyone to have a society where a few people are doing really well, the winners, and then you have a lot of people who are really struggling. It's not sustainable to keep having these things out of reach for so many people. God forbid, because you're living in Manhattan and you're whining because you can't go out every night with your friends because it's just too gosh darn expensive. And so you're going to blame it on the people who make money, who've actually earned something for themselves, who've got a little jingle in their pocket because I don't know. Maybe they did the hard work and worked their way up into Manhattan. And you're going to blame them for the fact that you can't afford diddly squat because of your unrealistic expectations about the world and where your place should be in it. Megan Lee. Although Megan Lee feels pretty financially secure at the moment, USA Today, the 28-year-old from Hawaii still feels anxious about the future. She says, it would be better for my financial portfolio if I was a bit more strict, said Lee, a director of advancement for a private school where she oversees all aspects of fundraising, such as donor gifts. Ironically, her financial stress keeps her from budgeting. That is an actual sentence that USA Today published. Her financial stress is so great that it keeps her from budgeting. She can't keep a hold of her wallet because she's got to spend because it makes her feel better about not having any money. She says, I don't want to face the fact that maybe I might never be able to afford my own house, she said, pointing to the high cost of living in Honolulu. Again, in what world is this reality? In what world do you think that at 28 years old, you should be able to afford the cost of living in Honolulu? And then you say that I don't budget because I'm too financially stressed. Last example, Aurelia Casey, USA Today says, for as long as she can remember, Aurelia Casey, 30 years old, has had at least 2 jobs. The New Yorker juggles a full-time job managing environmental programming for young people at a nonprofit while babysitting part-time. She doesn't want to leave New York City. Again, here we go. But she's not sure if she can ever afford to raise children there. She says, financial success to me would be making enough money to survive in my hometown. You live in New York City. You have a full-time job as an environmental programmer. First of all, I don't even know what that is. That's some gobbledygook for some green energy bullcrap is what that is. I'm not even sure that that's a real job. You do it for a nonprofit, which everybody knows pays in peanuts. And you're babysitting part-time, and you're complaining that you cannot afford housing in New York City. And honest to God, USA Today is using these morons as examples for why millennials and Gen Zers are losing faith in the American dream. Did nobody in any part of this survey, in any of this article, in any of these interviews, look at any of these idiots and say, have you ever considered moving out of your extraordinarily expensive city? Have you ever considered maybe actually going and getting a grown-up job? Have you ever considered not just going out and blowing all of your money on cocktails with friends? Have you ever considered sitting down with a financial planner and making a budget? Have you ever considered changing some of the ways that you do life to see if maybe this could pan out a little bit better for you? Instead, USA Today, and by the way, this is not the only article that I have read like this. This is one of many articles exactly like this, immediately takes it as at face value that all of these poor millennials and Gen Zers are absolutely struggling, and they've got it so much harder than generations before them because they feel that way. And we all must lament with them in this world of woe. Here we've got all of these watercolor artists who cannot pay their mortgages, and it's just so terribly sad. By the way, in case you are questioning the reality of all of this and whether or not these people are actually living in it, hint, they're not. USA Today reported that millennials and Gen Z in this survey, get this, defined financial success as basically having so much money that you can go out and buy whatever you want, whenever you want, without even having to look at the price tag. Here was the actual definition of financial success that these people gave. You are fairly successful if you don't have to budget. When you're walking to the grocery store, you don't have to look at the prices as much. That is what millennials and Gen Zers, according to this study, define as financial success. Which is interesting. I can fault the baby boomer generation of my parents for quite a good bit, as a matter of fact. But I don't know that I've ever heard a person in my parents' generation, many of whom I consider to be very successful, who own their own homes, who do pretty well for themselves. I don't know that I can name a single one of them who would say that they've got so much money that they don't have to think about it and can pay for whatever they want whenever and don't have to look at grocery prices. As a matter of fact, many of them are the ones that are currently complaining the most about Bidenflation because they don't want to pay more. If that's your definition of financial success, if that's the measure by which you are saying, you are claiming based on the way that you feel that earlier generations had it easier than you, you are living in a fantasy land. There has never been a generation, there have never been people that achieved immediate financial success to the point where they didn't have to think about prices for anything. Just walked straight out in their early 20s and plunked down money and bought a home just like that, no problem. Is that honestly what you think that our parents and our grandparents' generation did? My father purchased his first home in his early 20s. Very quickly after that, he was having trouble making the mortgage payments because, believe it or not, it wasn't just easy peasy lemon squeezy. And he ended up selling that home to my grandparents, his parents, and then renting it back from them for many years. He didn't purchase another home until I was 12 years old. By then, he already had 3 children, which, by the way, is also the number of jobs that I saw him work at any given time. Many times during my childhood, my father was always bivocational. Oftentimes he would work 3 jobs, including a paper route that had him getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, 7 days a week with no break. He worked construction, he painted houses, he busted his tail to provide for his family, and he was very tired, but he was proud to do it. That generation did not just have things easy. But see, our generation, the millennial generation, the Gen Z generation, it's not just that they think that they're entitled. It's not just that they think that things need to be handled to them. My generation believes that we have a monopoly on struggle. We are the only strugglers to have ever struggled. Everything is so much harder for us. Oh, woe is us. Isn't it just terrible? We don't appreciate the struggles and the work that it took for earlier generations to have the home ownership rates that they did. I'm not saying that inflation is not rampant and out of control. I'm not saying that things aren't different now. I'm not saying that we don't have other bills that we need to pay. We're going to get to some of that in just a second. But what I am saying is this notion that everything just came easy and that millennials and the Gen Zers coming after them are the only ones to have faced choices, to have had to make sacrifices, to have had to buckle down, live in places they didn't want to live, settle for a house that wasn't their dream home, settle for a job that didn't make them feel like they were floating around on cotton candy all day. The idea that we are the first generation to ever face those choices and those struggles is ridiculous. I mean, since we're talking about anecdotes here, let me tell you that in many places that I have lived, the majority of my friends in their late 20s and early 30s have actually owned their own home. My husband and I, for several years, lived in a rural Maryland town where the vast majority of people that we knew owned their own home. Young couples in their 20s and their 30s, many of them lived on one income, and the mom was a stay-at-home mom. There were several reasons for this. First of all, it was an affordable area. You could actually get homes at an affordable price. You weren't trying to hack it in DC or New York City or Atlanta or Los Angeles. These people also had reasonable expectations for a home. They were smaller homes. They were 2 and 3 level ranchers or split levels. They were fixer-uppers. They weren't dream homes, particularly dream homes in urban areas that are wildly overpriced. And this is how these families were able to do this and able to start building equity because they recognized that they had to be in a place where they could afford to get their start. And that was fine for them versus a place like where I live right now in Northern Virginia, where the vast majority of people that I know don't own their own homes. The ones who do, first of all, they have several commonalities. Many of them are married couples and they've got 2 incomes, which is incredibly important. And those who own up here are often rolled in equity from other properties that they had bought in other places, and it kind of snowballed. This was not the first home that they ever purchased. They started somewhere else. And this is a commonality that they have with older generations that started smaller. By the way, I've gotten where I've gotten because I've tried to be smart with my money and make good decisions, as I know do so many of you. That's why you should care so much about where you're getting your health coverage and where your hard-earned dollars are going. Every single year, millions of Americans just like you pay exorbitant premiums for health coverage that you might not even need or use, only for your hard-earned money to go to fund medical procedures for others that you don't agree with, like abortions or gender-affirming surgeries for kids. That's where Share Healthcare can help. Share Healthcare is not traditional health insurance. I'm partnering with Share Healthcare to let you know about their affordable cost-sharing plans between people of like faith and values who simply want to get the health coverage that they need without funding things that violate their conscience. And with plans that start as low as $149 a month, saving money and sleeping easier never got more simple. Check out sharehealthcare.com. Enter the referral code MRCTV23, that's sharehealthcare.com, MRCTV23, and find a plan that works for you today. So there are so many problems with articles like this. This is why I click on these. This is why I read these. They are incredibly problematic because not only are they presenting this wackadoodle, unrealistic view of home ownership and what it means to millennials and Gen Zers, but it also promotes this idea that the American dream is out of reach for so many and that we should just take that on face value. USA Today and the rest of the media that pushes this idea frames the problem as the primary reason why younger generations are disillusioned with the American dream and don't buy into it, probably because they have an unrealistic idea of what it actually means and because they don't realize that they're often voting for the very causes of the problem. So let's get into that for just a second. First of all, the ridiculousness of the high expectations that so many younger people have. The American dream, let me just go ahead and shatter this illusion for you right now. The American dream is not and has never been to be born in America, get a degree, work 40 hours a week, and somebody just hands you a house and a white picket fence and a nice car and a vacation spot in Aspen. It's never been that easy. It's never been that. Ever at all. As a matter of fact, the American dream is not actually linked to any specific measure of success or wealth. The American dream is simply having the freedom to pursue the life that you want, even if it takes sacrifice and hard work and time and being satisfied, even temporarily, with what you are able to buy. It might not be a 5-bedroom, 3,000 square foot house right away with a gourmet kitchen or a condo on the 75th floor of some Manhattan building. That's not the definition of the American dream. It might be a 50-year-old 2-bedroom rancher in the suburbs that needs a little bit of elbow grease. But that's where it starts. And see, that standard used to be normal. It used to be understood that having a little spit of dirt, whether it was fancy, whether it's your dream home, that wasn't the point. The point was to have something of your own, and people went where they could afford to get that. They moved. They relocated if they had to. They purchased things smaller than what they ultimately wanted if they had to. And they were happy with that and satisfied with that as long as it was theirs. The other problem that this presents is what I see as this disillusionment with the American dream, this redefining of the American dream, and the way that that ends up trickling down into the same exact political garbage heap that helped create some of these problems in the first place. This idea that the American dream is dead, or that it's unattainable, or that it's unrealistic bleeds over into the belief among younger people, first of all, that capitalism is evil. If I'm working full-time and I'm stuck, it couldn't possibly be because I have unrealistic expectations. It couldn't possibly be because I'm unwilling to move out of this city. It couldn't possibly be because I have a standard for myself far and above my means. It couldn't possibly be because of anything about myself that I need to be willing to change. It must be because the rich keep getting richer, and somehow that means that I'm being kept down. It must be because the capitalist system that we're all entrenched in is inherently evil and is keeping me from getting ahead. Whenever you ask anybody to explain that, by the way, whenever you ask any millennial or any Gen Zer to explain that, they don't really have a good explanation other than the fact that billionaires shouldn't exist. Somebody else has a lot more money than me, and here I am struggling with my $20, Manhattan cocktails, and that shouldn't exist. So somehow it's the billionaire's fault. Somehow it's the millionaire's fault. And it's interesting because it also couldn't possibly be because of big government screwing everybody over, or because all of the left-wing politicians in those blue cities that you want to live in so bad, who, understand how hard it is to be poor, are creating the very policies that are fueling this problem in the first place. The New York Times in 2022 wrote this about starter homes. The affordable end of the market has been squeezed from every side. Land costs have risen steeply in booming parts of the country. Construction materials and government fees have become more expensive. Communities nationwide are far more prescriptive today than decades ago about what housing should look like and how big it must be. Some ban vinyl siding. Others require 2-car garages. Nearly all make it difficult to build the kind of home that could sell for $200,000 today. What? Do you mean that government red tape and regulations might actually be the cause of some of these problems? Who would have thunk? I don't know, maybe every single conservative over here that has ever said, you know why things are really expensive? You know why you can't afford anything? You know why you can't build anything? You know why you can't do anything? You know why it is so gosh darn expensive to live anymore? Because of all of the regulations that bind up our lives to the point where we can't move. The Times goes on, only about 8% of new single-family homes today are 1,400 square feet or less. In the 1940s, according to CoreLogic, nearly 70% of new houses were that small. But the economics of the housing market and the local rules that shape it have dictated today that many small homes are replaced by McMansions, or that their moderate income residents are replaced by wealthier ones. In Portland, Oregon, for example, a lot may cost $100,000. Permits add $40,000 to $50,000. Removing a fir tree 36 inches in diameter costs another $16,000 in fees. In fact, many of the regulations that are pricing out the construction of smaller homes are the green policies that younger generations support in droves. That is the crux here. It costs so much for a builder, for a contractor to come in and even clear the land to put a house on it, that if he built the kind of house that younger generations could afford, if he built the kind of starter home that earlier generations were able to purchase because they were plentiful, he wouldn't be able to turn a profit because local and state government, and in some cases the federal government, has made it so expensive to get the permits to construct the building. He has to build something big and expensive just to make money. There is no profit in building a starter home. And that is entirely on the government. And much of that is because of the same green policies that younger generations have decided that they want without realizing that they are screwing themselves over by supporting it. I mean, it's not rocket science to understand how this works. The bottom line is you're not being priced out of the market. You are screwing yourself over through a combination of stupid choices. The first is the choice to live in your own fantasy, where you should be able to buy whatever you want, whenever you want, where you define financial success as being able to go out with your friends and blow $15 on every single margarita and not bat an eyelash, and then go home to your condo in Manhattan or your downtown LA flat or your San Francisco apartment overlooking the bay or whatever, all on a salary that you earn with your $150,000 degree in, environmental poetry. And then when that doesn't match with reality, you blame all of the rich CEOs and America and your grandma and everybody else for why your life sucks. The second problem is that you continue to politically support the same politicians and the same left-leaning policies that have landed the housing market in such a freaking pickle in the first place. No builder can afford to build you a starter home, even if you wanted one, because the cost of appeasing the government and getting all of the required permits would be more than constructing the 2-bedroom split level that you need. All because you've bought into this idea that the planet is roasting and about to catch on fire, and the spotted owls are all dying, and every creek bed that sits dry for 9 months out of the year needs to be protected by federal fiat. That's what's causing this mess. Inflation does not just magically happen. Things don't just magically get more expensive for no reason. Elections and the policies that follow them have consequences. You're looking at them. These policies cost money, not just taxpayer money in the form of, projects and government agencies and ridiculous studies and blech, but money in the form of rising prices that strangle young people who are trying to get their start in life, like you. And when you couple that with high expectations and an absolute unwillingness to do things like move out of your big, expensive city limits and consider places and homes that you could actually afford, even if they're not exactly where you want to live or exactly what you want to live in. Maybe taking the job that doesn't make you feel like, a unicorn is licking your face every moment of every day. Then yes, buying a home becomes unattainable under those circumstances. You have made it unattainable for yourself. And as somebody who has navigated this space, as somebody who has had to play this game and who has walked this road for the last decade of my life, I take this very personally, because as I read these articles about why people in my generation are feeling left behind and giving up on the American dream and calling it unattainable. And all it does is cite adults in their 20s and 30s in these big, expensive cities who want to be part-time professional Instagram influencers and then don't understand why they can't move out of their parents' basements. It's maddening, because I can see how that is trickling down into shaping our political landscape as people get more and more frustrated. And then that anger and that frustration over all of this gets misplaced, or better put, it gets redirected and weaponized by smart politicians into convincing all of these young people that capitalism and the traditional family and the American dream, they're the real problems here. They're the real culprits. They're the things keeping you down and making sure that you can't get ahead. They are why you are poor and miserable and depressed. And if we could just get rid of all of that stuff, then things would be so much better. And this whole entire thing becomes a self-licking ice cream cone. Younger people are being priced out of the housing market and are struggling to get on their own 2 feet because of their own harebrained choices and because of the harebrained policies that they continue to support in droves. Wake up. The American dream is as out there and is alive and well and is attainable for you. But you're going to have to work for it. And you're not just going to have to work and work and work. You're going to have to work smartly. You're going to have to take a look at your own life and your own choices and what you ultimately want out of it and what it's going to take to get there. And then you're going to have to look around at the environment that is creating the problems that you're facing and stop contributing to it by supporting all of this left-wing garbage that is creating this issue in the first place. We cannot blame older generations for this. Millennials are rounding 40. Many of us have been of voting age for 20 plus years. This is no longer a problem that we can blame on earlier generations. This is something we are doing to ourselves. Wake up. And with that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Make sure you head over to Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show. That way you won't ever miss an episode. Also subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with Tim Graham. I will see you guys back here next Thursday. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. God bless.